About chapter 10. It's a chapter about emotions. Maybe. There we go. Ekman, Sorensen, and Friesen in 1969 proposed that there is a set of basic emotions that are universally recognized around the world. And this is what they discovered. These are the emotions that they discovered were universal: anger, happy, sad, afraid or scared, surprised, disgust. And these are the ones that other people have proposed were universal, but they haven't proven it yet. If you can identify that one, it's contempt. Is it universal or not? Shame. Haven't proven that it's universal yet. Embarrassment. And the last one is interest. And of course, if we look at this lady's eyes, one of the things that we see is that her pupils aren't very dilated. If they were dilated, they would show interest. They would show more interest. And it's one of the ways you can tell if somebody's interested in you romantically. You can look at their eyes, and if their eyes are dilated, it means that they're interested in you. And that one is pride, of course. Though happiness has many different words, the expression for happiness does not vary globally. When shown poised facial expressions, each culture is best at identifying expressions from their own culture. A meta-analysis of cross-cultural studies on facial expressions, people were about 9% more accurate at identifying people from their own culture. In other words, if we were looking at Navajos, that's you guys, then you would be better able to identify the facial expressions of the people from your own culture. Adams and colleagues in 2010 had participants guess what emotions were being displayed by just showing them pictures of eyes. The participants were better at identifying the emotions of people from their own culture. They also noted that they showed more activity in their amygdala when they were shown eyes from people from their own culture who were demonstrating fear. And that's what eyes look like when somebody's afraid. As you can see, the pupils are greatly dilated. And if we had seen that in her, then we would know that she was really interested in the guy she was looking at. The differences in facial expressions of emotions across cultures are distinct enough that people can reliably guess the nationality of targets who are expressing emotions, even though the targets are fairly similar cultural backgrounds. An American can guess better than chance whether a target is from the United States or from Australia. This is an individual by the name of Michelle Janicki. She was really popular about, 6 or 8 years ago. She's a hurdler. She had this little dance that she did to warm up before she ran, and she became very popular. Michelle Janicki. And if you look at her and you say, yeah, she sure looks Australian to me, then, well, let's see if you can identify another Australian. I used to teach at Ashford University, and Ashford University decided they didn't want to be a college anymore. So they moved some of our students to different places. I started working at Dene College, of course. But one of my students was Australian, and she went to Viterbo, which is up in Wisconsin. It's a Catholic school up in Wisconsin, and she was Australian. She started playing soccer for the Viterbo. I can't remember, the Lions or something. Anyway, I have a picture of her along with some other individuals in just a second on the next page and the next page. The interesting thing is that one of the individuals is from Show Low, Arizona, which is just south of Holbrook, of course, just south of Snowflake. And I know she's from Show Low because she was at Ashford University. She was there to play soccer for the women's team, and then she started playing for Viterbo along with the Australian. So I'm going to show you a picture of four different individuals, and it is your job to figure out which one is from Australia, which one is from Show Low, and which two are from Wisconsin. So there you go. There's two of them. Women's soccer. And there are the two. There's the other two. So two of these individuals are from Wisconsin. One is from Show Low and one is from Australia. Let me show you the first group again, the first two again, and then the second two. Okay. Okay. If you said that she was the Australian, you would be incorrect. She's from Wisconsin. And if you said she was the Australian, you would be correct. She is the Australian. If you said that she is the girl from Show Low, you would be incorrect. She is from Wisconsin, and there's the girl from Show Low. The young woman, excuse me, from Show Low. So this one's from Show Low, this one is from Wisconsin, this one is from Australia, and this young lady is from Wisconsin. And they all played for the Viterbo women's soccer team. The same researchers did a study earlier comparing Japanese participants with Japanese Americans. The results were similar to those for the Americans and the Australians. When the faces showed emotions, they were easier to read. Neutral faces were much harder to read. Japanese Americans and women from Japan. Baron Cohen et al. In 2001 and Krauss et al. In 2010 found that people of lower socioeconomic background more accurately identified facial expressions of emotion. The lower the status, the more individuals must attend to facial expressions in order to survive. Different cultures will attend to different parts of the face to read expressions. The Japanese find emotions socially disruptive and thus are more likely to try to display a neutral face than Americans. But it is hard to control the muscles around the eyes, so the Japanese focus on the eyes to determine emotion. Research by Yuki et al. In 2007 attempted to determine where Japanese and American focus was when trying to read facial expressions. The Japanese read facial expressions from the eyes. Americans read facial expressions from the mouths. European Americans are more likely to try to read the whole face than the Japanese, and are more likely to include mouths prominently in their cartoon art. Japanese cartoon art shows dominant eyes and sometimes no mouths at all, as in anime. This is an American cartoon. You can see the prominent mouths and all these individuals. This is anime, where the mouths are barely there at all. This is King of the Hill, an American cartoon. Prominent mouths. The Simpsons, of course. Prominent mouths. My Little Kitty doesn't have a mouth at all. Japanese art. And there's some more anime. Barely have mouths at all. American Dad, very prominent mouths. And I'm not sure what the cartoon is. This is really kind of weird. If you watch any shows from Japan, every once in a while somebody will be wearing a handkerchief that's tied right under their nose and covers their heads. I have no idea what it means. It's really kind of strange. But I've seen it not only in this cartoon, of course, but also in a video dealing with teaching new languages, and one individual had a um, handkerchief tied under his nose. Just really different, something that you never see in the United States. While researchers argue that all cultures have a similar capacity to read facial expressions, cultures tend to maintain varying display rules for facial expressions. Display rules are culturally specific rules that govern which facial expressions are appropriate in a given situation and how intensely they should be exhibited. Some cultures encourage people to display their emotions in clear, if not exaggerated, form. In certain Arab populations, it is dishonorable if a man does not respond to an insult with a great demonstration of anger. And this is one of the things we just discovered. The FBI agent that was interrogating Saddam Hussein from Iraq said that, well, of course, they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction, and this is what they were deathly afraid of. That some of the threats that they had made, that the Iranians had made to the rest of the world, might be carried out. He may have nuclear weapons, so that's one of the reasons why they invaded Iraq in 2003, I think, 2001, 2002. 2001 they invaded, 2002 they invaded Afghanistan, 2003 they invaded Iraq to take away this threat against the world. And what they discovered was that it was an exaggeration. And of course, we found out that that was his plan all along, that he would exaggerate what he had in order to keep his enemies at bay. And of course, this exaggeration of emotion is something that is demonstrated in the Arab world, especially with their leaders. The Kaluli of New Guinea tend to show their emotions particularly intensely and dramatically. And this is according to Schlieffen in 1979. And these are actually Kaluli warriors. As you can see, they paint themselves and they try to look as fearsome as they possibly can. Among the Alaska Native Utku, public expressions of anger are strongly condemned, and this is according to Briggs in 1917. This tattoo pattern is specific to the Utku people. They tattoo their chins, the women do. The Balinese have a preference for emotional smoothness, where the emphasis is on avoiding strong displays of emotional feelings for both positive and negative emotions. When Americans are embarrassed, they tend to make a facial expression where their faces turn red, they close their eyes, and they look down. In India, when someone is embarrassed, they literally bite their tongues, an expression that is not recognized by people in the United States. Voluntarily produced facial expressions like a wink and a false smile suggest the existence of cultural display rules that lead people to express idiosyncratic facial expressions known as ritualized displays. And of course, this is Justin Bieber. This is a fake smile, and that's a real smile. And usually you can tell the difference between a fake and a real smile by whether their eyes are crinkled up. He's smiling, but that's not a real smile. Here he is, he's smiling because he's happy, and you can see his eyes are crinkled up. The same way with this individual. This is the fake smile, and this is the real smile. You can tell because the eyes are crinkled. He has brought his jaw muscle, not his jaw muscles, but his cheek muscles up, and that has forced him to crinkle his eyes. So you can tell the difference between a fake smile and a real smile. The facial feedback hypothesis states that the expressions on our faces reflect our true feelings. Strack et al. In 1988 sought to prove the hypothesis by forcing the face to form a frown or smile by holding a pencil in their mouths while watching a comedy. The researchers discovered that those in a smile mode found the humor in the comedy funnier. Now, this is interesting because when I was at Ashford, I actually did this experiment with some of my students in it wasn't a cultural psychology class, it was a social psych class. This is a classic experiment or research done by Strack. Strack was a German, which is kind of interesting because the Germans don't show a lot of emotion. So he had some of his students hold the pen in their teeth with an open mouth, and some close their mouths. And of course, this looks more like a frown. And what they discovered was if you have a smile on your face, you're more likely to find something, a humorous movie or video funnier than if you didn't. Now, what I did, I showed my students, what did I show? Rugrats. That was a cartoon, Rugrats. And I had some of them with the pin in their mouth this way and some of them with the pin in their mouth that way. And it worked exactly the same way. The ones that were watching Rugrats with an open mouth found it funnier than the ones who had their mouths closed. Matsumoto et al. In 1988 asked American and Japanese participants about an experience where they expressed select emotions. The Americans reported feeling those emotions longer and more intensely. And we all recognize that's the Green Lantern symbol. Mesquita and Karasawa in 2002 had American and Japanese students complete questionnaires indicating the emotions they were experiencing a number of times during the day. The Japanese were 3 times more likely to indicate that they had no emotions than the Americans were. McCallums et al. In 2012 and Ryder et al. In 2008 found that East Asians are less attentive to their visceral states when compared with Westerners. Zokoto in 2010 found that Ghanaians attend to their emotions less than Americans do. And these are pictures of Ghanaians. From these studies, researchers have hypothesized that masking emotions in East Asia might be leading East Asians to experience fewer and less intense emotions than Americans. Research in the West has indicated that people with hostile tendencies are at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. The reason hostility leads to cardiovascular disease is that hostile people have more occasions when they need to inhibit their anger. However, in cultures where anger is not expressed, people tend to experience anger less intensely. This hypothesis was tested looking at European and Chinese Canadians. Given potentially anger-induced scenarios, the Chinese Canadians found the scenarios less anger-inducing than did the European Canadians. The most common reaction by the European Canadians from the anger-provoking scenarios was to openly express their anger. For Chinese Canadians, their most common response was to reappraise the situation in a less angry way or to make efforts to distract themselves from the anger-provoking event. The European Canadians felt much anger and tried to express it openly. The Chinese Canadians adopted strategies to minimize their anger response and thus felt less angry. Anderson and Lennon in 2006 measured the blood pressures of their Canadian participants. Both Chinese Canadian and European Canadian blood pressure slowly returned to baseline levels. Chinese Canadian blood pressure returned to normal faster than European Canadians. Chinese Canadians experienced their anger less intensely than European Canadians and were more comfortable with strategies that served to reduce their experience of anger, whereas the European Canadians suffered from physiological consequences if they did not openly express their anger. Compared with Americans, negative emotions in East Asians are associated with fewer negative health outcomes and less of a neural response when suppressing their emotions, indicating that it is not as effortful for them to suppress negative emotions. The English language has 2,000 different emotion words. English speakers are cued by their language to express their emotions. The Chawang of Malaysia have only 8 words that describe emotion, and only 3 represent Ekman's basic emotions: anger, shame, and fear. Luganda speakers from Uganda do not make a distinction between sorrow and anger. The Gidjingali of the Aborigines of Australia use one word, Guru Kaj, to express both shame and fear. Samoans use one word, Alofa, to express both love and pity. The Utku of Alaska do not distinguish between feelings of kindness and gratitude. And as we can see, she's got the same tattoo on her lower lip. The Ifaluk in Micronesia do not even have a word for emotion, instead lumping all internal states together. Despite the fact that English is a Germanic language, there is no equivalent word in English for the German word Schadenfreude, feelings of pleasure that one gets when witnessing the hard times of someone else. The Javanese have a term, ikhlas, which refers to somewhat pleasant feelings caused by frustration. In Japanese, ame captures the relatively pleasant feelings that one experiences when allowed to emphasize his or her dependence on one another. It often involves a tendency to behave inappropriately toward a close other as a gesture to demonstrate how secure the relationship is. And of course, we would consider this a sign of codependency in the United States. But as far as they're concerned, it shows a lot of emotional connectedness because they're able to be inappropriate toward their significant other without their significant other having a negative reaction. And the word is ame. So it would be if a husband and wife, the husband insulted the wife all the time and she just kind of laughed it off or accepted it. That would be ame. Or vice versa. If a husband, if a wife treated a husband incorrectly or inappropriately and he accepted it, that would be a form of ame. It would maybe it was inappropriate, but he would still accept it. Uchida et al. In 2009 compared the emotional responses from athletes after an Olympic victory. Comparing Japanese and U.S. statements, the researchers determined that the Japanese feel especially good when they're focusing on how their emotional experiences led them to connect with others. Americans feel especially good when they're dwelling on those emotional experiences that distinguish them from others. So the Japanese want to be connected. They want their emotions to connect them with other people, and the Americans want them to distinguish themselves from others. In 2013, Oishi and colleagues examined dictionaries for the definition of happiness in 30 countries. They found that luck was included in the definition in all but the United States, Spain, Argentina, Ecuador, India, and Kenya. People who live in countries where happiness is defined as good luck report feeling less happy than those where luck is not seen as an important part of the definition. Looking at definitions across time in U.S. dictionaries, the researchers discovered that the definition of happiness included the concept of good luck until 1961. Subjective well-being is the feeling of how satisfied one is with one's life. The nations that score the highest on subjective well-being are Scandinavian and Nordic countries, much of Latin America, various English-speaking countries, and Western Europe. And actually, the happiness scale just came out a couple days ago, and lo and behold, all the Scandinavian countries were in the top 10. One country that was in the top 10 that was not a Scandinavian country was Luxembourg, and the number 10 was New Zealand. So there you go. The least subjectively happy people are people of the former Soviet republics and some of the impoverished countries in Africa and South Asia. And of course, this is the Ukrainian flag. Ukraine used to be part of one of the Soviet republics, and now Russia is trying to conquer Ukraine. They did a similar study of the regions in the United States and found that the Mountain West and New England had the highest subjective well-being. The area with the lowest subjective well-being was the Southeast. Many factors contribute to the overall satisfaction that people have with their lives. One is wealth. People who live in countries in which they have access to enough wealth to easily meet the basic needs of life tend to be considerably more satisfied than those who do not. Looking at the history of subjective well-being, once a country has an average gross domestic product of at least 40% of that of the United States, there is no longer any pronounced relation between money and subjective well-being, and that's according to Diener et al. In 1995. Diener is kind of an interesting word. It means helper in German. When I did autopsies, when I was in the service, they called the individual that assisted with the autopsy as a diener. Money can buy a lot of happiness if you're struggling to survive. However, it has much less impact if your basic needs have been met, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking at this GDP of 40% of what it is in the United States, and people are struggling to survive. Those countries that promote human rights the most tend to have the happiest citizens. Those countries in which people live under the constant threat of being thrown in jail for suspicions of plotting against the government are not as happy. The overall equality among people in a country is associated with a greater subjective well-being. And this is a picture of an individual who won the Olympic marathon, I believe, and he was from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is having domestic problems right now, and the symbol that he has raised, hands tied together, that is the symbol. He did that in order to show that his brothers are being incarcerated. Not happy. The Scandinavian and Nordic nations have various social policies to minimize differences in opportunities among its citizens. These nations have some of the happiest citizens in the world. It seems people feel good when their rights are not threatened and they have opportunities that are comparable to those of their neighbors. And I just remembered Finland was the happiest country in the world, as curious as that is. So what are the other Scandinavian countries? Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland. That's not all of them, is it? Yeah, I guess that's it. That's the Nordic and Scandinavian countries. Oh, Switzerland was in that group as well. 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm missing one. And I can't think of what it is. People in individualistic societies were far more likely than those in collectivist societies to base their life satisfaction on how many positive emotions they are experiencing. Positive emotions appear to be seen as the basis of a good life in individualistic societies. Oishi in 2002 looked at how Asian American and European Americans interpreted their past. Oishi had people record the week they were having and then asked them to remember the week. While the two groups had similar weeks, the European Americans remembered their week as more positive than it actually was. The Asian Americans remembered their week accurately. Follow-up research by Rogers and colleagues in 2004 found that European Americans appear to be operating under an implicit theory that they should be happy. Asian Americans seem to operate under the theory that emotional experience should be balanced and consist of both positive and negative experiences. Researchers feel that it is quite possible that many of the observed cultural differences in subjective well being are based on the different theories that people from different cultures have about how they should be feeling about their lives. In a study by Falke et al. In 2010, Canadian students were asked to choose between a video game that was fun and one that boosted thinking skills. The results indicated that European Canadians were more likely to choose the fun game, whereas Asian Canadians were more likely to choose the useful game. In the same study, students were asked to select university courses from a fictitious set of course descriptions. European Canadians were more likely to choose their courses that sounded like fun and interesting compared with the Asian Canadians, who focused more on the perceived utility of the courses. Asian Canadians seem less interested in the idea of doing things for the sake of anticipated positive feelings compared with European Canadians. Life appears to be less about a pursuit of happiness for people with Asian cultural experiences than it does for Westerners. European Americans report experiencing many positive emotions and less depression. East Asians who report having many positive emotions are no less at risk for depression than those East Asians who report having very few positive emotions. And that's according to Liu et al. In 2011. Positive feelings do not seem to carry the same protection against depression in East Asia. Grossman and Cross in 2010 investigated Russian and American personalities through vignettes and discovered that Russians were more likely to identify with the stereotype of the Russian brooder than were Americans. Reflective Americans were more prone to depression, but Russian brooders tended toward less depression. And that's what a brooder looks like. And so does that. And so does that. These are Russians, by the way. Brooding over negative emotions, while common in Russia, does not lead to Russians feeling depressed as it does for Americans. Tsai and colleagues in 2006 proposed the notion of ideal effect, the kinds of feelings that people desire. They are the emotions that people are trying to achieve, so they structure their lives in order to increase the likelihood that they will experience these emotions. For most Americans, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are high in arousal, whereas for most East Asians, ideal effect contains positive emotions that are low in arousal. Tsai et al. In 2006 looked at children's storybooks and found that American storybooks showed faces that were excited and had bigger smiles than the storybooks for children in Taiwan. The researchers discovered that European American preschool children preferred pictures of excited faces more than the Taiwanese preschoolers did, and they also felt more similar to the characters who were engaged in high arousal activities. The Taiwanese children felt more similar to the characters engaged in low arousal activities, like meditation. Looking at the Gospels of the Bible and Buddhist texts, Miao and Sepla in 2007 found that high arousal states were encouraged more in the Christian texts, whereas low arousal states were encouraged more in Buddhist texts. Some Christian sects include enthusiastic religious practices such as jumping, shouting, and applause, and rattlesnake handling. Of course, this group is very small. Buddhist religious practices emphasize meditation and the calming of one's mind. European Americans are more likely to engage in active individual activities such as jogging and rollerblading, whereas Asian Americans are more likely to pursue more passive activities such as sightseeing and picnicking. And if you've ever been around tourists and there were Asian tourists, they want to take pictures. They don't want to walk. They don't want they don't want to exercise at all. They just want to take pictures. They want to ride in a car and stop and then take pictures and then get back in the vehicle and go to the next site. And of course, European Americans are more likely to want to walk between places. Um, yeah. Anyway, European Americans are more likely to prefer fast tempo and exciting music, whereas Chinese are more likely to prefer calm music. And this is the band Quiet Riot. They don't exist anymore. This individual died of a drug overdose. I think he's the only one. Anyway, if you want to listen to Quiet Riot's Come Feel the Noise, just click on this. If I did it, it's copyrighted, so it would block my lecture, and I would have to redo the lecture and take it out. Among Westerners, interpersonally disengaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well being is associated with positive feelings. People operate under the implicit theory that more positive feelings are better. Positive emotions serve as a bulwark against depression, and high arousal positive emotions are preferred. Among East Asians, and interpersonally engaging acts feel especially good. Subjective well being is associated with appropriate role behaviors. People operate under the implicit theory that it is good to experience both positive and negative feelings. Positive emotions are not associated with less depression, and low arousal positive emotions are more sought after. This X, if you click on this X, then what will happen is it will go to YouTube and it will show you the top 100 songs in Japan. Actually, it only shows about 20 of them, but of 3 years ago when I first put this lecture together. So all you have to do is click on that. And that is the end of the lecture. So I'll talk to you guys next week.